Hello, my name is Alessandro Garza, and I am here to do a TED Talk. On a more serious note, this TED Talk is about human trafficking, and there are a lot of different things that need to be said and need to be clarified about human trafficking, and I will open the floor up for questions at the end of this TED Talk. All right, so here we go. So every day, there are an astounding amount of human trafficking occurrences in the world. This is a grotesque business in which children and adults are sold to other people throughout the global industry of human trafficking. It is one of the most dangerous industries on the planet due to its foundation and end result. This quote-unquote transaction of men, women, and children usually leads to their molestation and mutilation or exploitation within the workforce, or what they call modern slavery. Throughout the buying and selling of these human beings, the human trafficking business has become one of the most profitable industries in the world. There are steps that need to be taken in order to halt the spread of this business, which would be promoting more awareness for parents, having more child safety laws, and discovering the identities of those involved. Human trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, or transporting of people into a situation of exploitation through the use of violence, deception, coercion, and the forcing of labor against their will. A very common misconception about human trafficking is that it must involve the transportation of victims. This is a false notion, and an act can be characterized as human trafficking when the victim is placed in conditions in which the purpose is to exploit them. Although much of the attention is focused on trafficking related to sexual purposes, the most common form of human trafficking actually is human trafficking by labor. The way in which this process is executed is human traffickers usually will look for easy targets, usually in a different region, or immigrants. It begins with basically a promise of work in a different region, and usually they target desperate human beings who need a working visa or just a job to make ends meet, and to support themselves and their families. So what they do is they promise these people a job, and once these people can't really refuse because they need the money, they now dig themselves into a hole with these human traffickers, and they must borrow money in order to accommodate themselves into their new lifestyle. And once they arrive in their new region, they begin work, and the people are manipulating them because all the money they borrowed, they're not being paid back enough to repay that money. So now they're forced to work, and they are able to pay off their debt to the traffickers, but it just becomes an endless cycle of them not having enough money, so them having to borrow money and them trying to pay back that borrowed money while still borrowing money. So it just becomes an endless cycle of forced labor that they're being manipulated into. A very common misconception about human trafficking is that people don't really think that it's still an issue based on time period or location. For example, many people here don't think that human trafficking is prevalent in the US and that it's also a thing of the past, so it doesn't really affect anywhere else. But it could not be further from the truth. Actually, it's developed the name modern slavery due to its very prominent and prevalent presence in today's society. It's just the reality that it still exists and thrives today, whether it be the prostitution of women and children or just the exploitation of forced labor by humans in general. According to a website that's on my slides, there are 40.3 million people being exploited through modern slavery, with 10 million of those victims being children. And those are really horrifying numbers to think about, because how could that be happening in our society today? How can that happen in a world where we think is so civilized and so sound and so safe? Well, there are many factors that contribute to an act being labeled as modern slavery. It could mean being forced to work under mental or physical threat, controlled by an employer with the threat of abuse involved, or being bought and sold as property. As you know, there are auctions for humans, and they have price tags and what their worth is on based on their health or their strength or even just their looks for sexual exploitation. For the next part of this TED Talk is one that might touch close to home for a lot of us because of the fact that this can basically happen to anybody who we may have known or we may have seen or that we've known in our life at some point. I had conducted an interview for my community involvement with a former student who had actually had an experience with a threat of human trafficking. I decided to call her up and ask her about some of the details and ask her some questions about it, and she was very helpful in giving me information, and she did decide that she wanted to remain anonymous, so I will not be saying her name. But basically the story, she was at a beach with her family and they were just playing in the sand, her and her brothers and sisters and whatnot, and all of a sudden a random guy starts taking photos of them, and they didn't know why, they didn't know what it was for or anything like that. Eventually they just kept playing and whatever, and the guy kept taking photos. However, give it 10 minutes maybe, and a police officer showed up and apprehended the person taking photos, because at whatever beach they were at, it was a very popular area for human traffickers, and they were known to come and take photos of children and their families, so that they could post the photos on the dark web and put up auction for the people they were taking photos of. So yes, he was apprehended, and then the officer let them know the situation, and they were very relieved that he was arrested. So I asked her some questions. So the first question I asked her was, what were your first thoughts and impressions when the photo was being taken of you and your family? She said, I was really skeptical of why they asked to take a photo, and I was kind of nervous because it was an uncomfortable situation. I was confused on why he asked for it, and I overall didn't know the purpose of the photo being taken. The second question I asked was, why do you think it is necessary for us to defend against human trafficking? Her response was, I think it's necessary because it is a horrible thing that should not be a part of humanity. It takes the lives of the innocent victims and suspects and subjects them to something no one should ever live through. Human trafficking is horrible and should be abolished, and it is people like us that need to stand against it. It needs to be shut down and never used again, and it is up to someone to do it, so why shouldn't it be us? The third question that I asked her was, in what ways has being Catholic helped you in your life, knowing that there are things like human trafficking out there in the world? Her response was, being a Catholic has helped me in my life because it has shown me that although there is bad stuff like this in the world, there is also good, and I know that God is always there with me, working to help bring out the good. It helps me with things like this because it helps me want to fight it and do something against it, knowing that God is on my side. It helps me realize that although there is evil in the world, there's always good that can overcome it, and we need to be that good. We need to work to overcome the evil. The fourth and final question that I asked her was, how do you think we as a society can fight this horrible, quote-unquote, industry? Her response was, we as a society can fight this horrible industry by coming together and teaming up against this horrible thing. If we unite together, we can make a big force against trafficking, and we can make a big difference. If we unite as a society, there are so many possibilities of the effect we can have towards this sad and disgusting issue, and I think we can truly make a difference to shut it down. So a big part of this TED Talk and Passion Project is the overall teaching of the church on the subject of human trafficking. So the church's belief on human trafficking is that human trafficking can be defined as a modern-day form of slavery that consists of the illegal trade of human beings through force, fraud, or coercion of the purposes of commercial, sexual exploitation, or forced labor. The main similarity between all of these forms is the exploitation of the human body, whether for labor or for sex. The church has worked diligently with a variety of organizations in the fight against human trafficking. This is because the church identifies with the poor and suffering. So you see the correlation there. Now, the church's way of fighting and preventing human trafficking can be explained through this paraphrase summary. So according to the Catholic Church, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 is a good starting point in the fight against human trafficking. However, it does not work in an efficient enough manner to where human trafficking can be stopped. They suggest implementing further educational steps to provide more awareness for society, along with services that will provide care to the victims of human trafficking through physical and identity protection. Finally, some proposals to the follow-up questions of my main thesis, which were: what are the ways we can increase the awareness of parents regarding the dangers of human trafficking? How can we implement more influential and efficient ways to stop human trafficking? And what are the steps that can be taken in order to discover the identities of those involved in human trafficking? Regarding the first question, the ways that we can increase awareness, as the church said in its basic teaching on the subject, is that we can implement more educational programs and organizations that raise awareness for the dangers and the commonalities surrounding human trafficking, and what to watch out for and what to be on the lookout. How can we implement more influential and efficient ways to stop human trafficking? So in order for this business to be severely reduced and contained, the United States government should impose more acts in order to crack down on the human trafficking business. There are already many acts in place trying to combat this industry, but none of them are as efficient as they should be. Many of them have good foundations and are aimed to do the right thing, but few produce any respectable results. It is easy to tell that the orders currently in place have had little to no effect on the monopolization of this market in the world, due to the fact that human trafficking is still very much alive in today's society. In order for this number to be greatly reduced, the government should pursue a task in acquiring perhaps a team of agents that could infiltrate the headquarters of traffickers all around the world in order to get to the bottom of the influence and the whole dynamic of the situation, and of course to implement more child safety laws so that parents could keep their kids safe, and that traffickers would know that there are more strict and demanding regulations out there against them.